Well, good morning. Excuse me while I clear my throat here. It's a very fresh morning up here on the edge of the East Lancashire moors. You can see the mists in the valley and then Pendle Hill beyond that. So quite fresh, but it's not raining and it's not yet snowing. Well, it's the morning of Friday, the 11th of January, 2019. And this is the first full week of 2019, and of course the chaos continues. And I got to say, it's wonderful to see people tuning into these early morning broadcasts from right across the world, and thank you for leaving the messages last week and letting me know where you were listening in from. And you know what is absolutely remarkable is how the awareness of the global corporatist agenda is now getting realized on a wider and wider basis. And unfortunately, of course, the global corporatist agenda is to keep the vast majority of people in abject economic slavery, where they don't have the time, even if they have the inclination, to do either research or certainly not to get involved in challenging the chaos of the corporatists, who work on the basis that the greater the political and economic chaos, then the more they can keep the masses in abject slavery and under control. So obviously the French are very much on point right now with their Gilet Jaune, the yellow vest protest, and that's going to really warm up, if that's not an inappropriate expression, this weekend, as the Gilet Jaune encourage their supporters to remove their money from French banks. Now, it has to be said that when this was attempted in Ireland nearly 8 years ago now, when the European Bank and the European Commission were effectively making Ireland a vassal state by taking control of its budget and its finances, then remarkably, 2 days before the due date, there was a massive failure of the ATM system in Ireland. And on the date when people were being encouraged to remove their money from Irish banks, then right across the country, ATMs had either a police or an army sentry just monitoring them. Of course, they weren't there to stop people attempting to take their money out. They were there to intimidate. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because if sufficient numbers took their money out of the central banking system in any country, with the exception of those who are labelled the axis of evil, and the reason being, of course, is that they're not part of the central banking system, well, because fractional reserve is used, so the reality is the banks actually don't have the cash at hand to be able to deal with mass withdrawals. And so it would create a very interesting issue. And it would also help to highlight the fraud of fiat currency, the basis of fractional reserve banking. And, maybe people need to look at the model of North Dakota. In the US, this is the only state in the US that isn't bankrupt. And the reason that it isn't bankrupt is because the governor of Dakota back in the early 1920s realized that participation in the Federal Reserve could only ever lead to bankruptcy. So he pulled the state out of the Federal Reserve. But very, very few people are aware of the North Dakota model. A lot of people in Iceland are, because this was the model they attempted to adopt after the contrived collapse of the Icelandic banks a little over a decade ago. So good luck with the Gilet Jaune activities this weekend. Obviously, the globalist puppet Macron has basically gone into hiding. He knows he's lost the country. He's lost the popular support, which if he ever had, he only really had because of the tactics of the French media in presenting Marie Le Pen as a totally unacceptable alternative. So, long way to go yet with the Gilet Jaune, but the reality is that the awareness, they are having a massive impact on raising awareness right throughout Europe and, of course, the rest of the world. And let's not forget that the final straw that broke the camel's back in France was effectively the UN treaty that was signed on December the 11th. But the French, like the Belgians and the Swedes, were very, very well aware of what was occurring here. And of course, this was the UN's attempt to get every member country to sign up to open door migration and to the final destruction of European homogeneity, of European culture, precisely as per the script produced by Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi in his 1920s publication, Pan-Europa. So, no conspiracy here, just the facts. And of course, these are facts that the establishment does not want people to be aware of, which is why there's very little mention, if any, in the British media about the Treaty of Marrakesh and the fact that Britain has indeed signed up to it. So, Yellow Vests, going to be a massive weekend in France. And by the way, since my last broadcast, I understand that Christoph Dettinger, the boxer that was caught on video squaring up to the riot police, the CRS, has been placed in custody until late February. So let's hope that Christoph Dettinger is treated with the appropriate respect whilst he is on remand in France. Unfortunately, the French remand system does not have a particularly good track record. So sadly, it's not going to surprise too many people watching this if Christoph meets with an unfortunate incident whilst he's in remand in France. So please, everyone, let's focus on Christoph Dettinger. Let him know that he has support not just from in France, but right across the awakening world. So, meanwhile, what's going on in the UK with other issues? Well, the fracking nightmare, although grinding to a halt, nonetheless, obviously, like any cornered rat, it doesn't know when the game's up. So, Quadrilla, despite moving all of their kit, almost all of their kit, off of the well site at Prestonby Road. This is the only well in the UK that had permission to be fracked. And of course, Quadzilla made the expected pig's ear of their first well, Z1, at Prestonby Road, and are evacuating the site with their tail very much between their legs, having basically not got anything like the response they wanted from the well, primarily because every time they powered up the pumps, they were triggering seismic events. And after 57, they decided that maybe discretion was the best option here and to quietly withdraw. Now, they do have a second well, Z2, drilled on that site, but they don't have permission to frack it. Now, the planning permission for Prestonby Road, basically, which was granted as a result of the public inquiry, and then Saeed Javid, who at the time was the Communities Minister, riding roughshod over Lancashire County Council's decision to reject Quadrilla's application and gave them the permission. But within that permission was also the stipulation that all work had to be completed on the Prestonby Road well site within 30 months of the first well being started. Now, it's acknowledged by both Quadrilla and Lancashire County Council that drilling started on the 31st of May 2017. So 30 months from that date is the 30th of November 2019. So in what is it now? In 18, 19 months, nearly 20 months, Quadrilla have managed to drill 2 wells and tickle one of them with their test fracks. And yet they expect to be able to drill 2 more wells and frack 3 wells inside the next 10.5 months. Ain't gonna happen. So what to do here? Well, this is a tremendous opportunity for people throughout Lancashire to start the process of writing to your Lancashire County Councillor, to writing to the planning officer in Lancashire County Council, and letting them know that any attempt by Quadrilla to seek an extension to remain at Preston Road beyond the 30th of November 2019 will be resisted extremely robustly. Now, the reason that this is important is because under some circumstances, Lancashire County Council and interested parties within the government would say, oh, you know, but this is a decision that can be taken by the planning officer. It doesn't have to go to the full council. Well, fortunately, within the Lancashire County Council's constitution, it states quite clearly that any issue that is controversial cannot be dealt with by the planning officers and has to be presented to the full planning committee. Well, I can't think of anything more controversial right now than Quadrilla attempting to establish a longer term presence at Preston Road, and of course also get a presence at Rossiter, the decision of which is expected imminently. So, to ensure that this issue does have to go before the full planning committee, now is the time to pen that email, pen that letter to your councillors in Lancashire, to the planning officer, and let them know that any extension applied for by Quadrilla is not acceptable to the wider community. So hopefully this puts an end pretty much to Preston Road. Hopefully there will be a recognition of the extent of the concerns by the community in the Fyle Peninsula, and the Rossiter application will be rejected. So Quadrilla, who are reliant on their financing from stakeholders such as Centrica at AJ Lucas in Australia. Now, the Centrica funding is dependent upon certain landmarks being achieved. And so the next 46.7 million from Centrica is, according to the terms, conditional upon the successful flow test at PNR, where there hasn't been a successful flow test because every time they tried to fire up the pumps beyond about 2,500-3,000 psi, guess what? They were triggering a seismic event. And they knew fine well that if they had powered the pumps up to, you know, the full 7.5 or so pounds per square inch pressure, then they were going to trigger such a seismic event that the order of magnitude would be such that it would kill the industry dead. Well, they came very close, but unfortunately not close enough. So, you know, they're going to obviously keep trying to keep the money flowing in. But hopefully Centrica will start to realise that this is literally throwing money into the proverbial black hole. Now, the other financiers are AJ Lucas in Australia, and AJ Lucas have effectively divested themselves of pretty much everything except Quadrilla. And so their stock value is totally dependent on convincing their mug punters that by investing in Quadrilla, they're going to make them millionaires by this time next year. Ain't going to happen. So, you know, here's an opportunity for people that have made the mistake of investing in UK fracking via AJ Lucas to get their money out of AJ Lucas and put it in something that, you know, perhaps has a a likelihood, a greater likelihood of a return, because it ain't going to happen with quadrilla. So elsewhere, of course, IGAS are moving equipment onto their well site at Misson Springs in North Nottinghamshire. And so, it's that area, it's North Nottinghamshire and Lincolnshire at Biscathorpe, that are now the two prime sites in the north of England. And of course, Misson Springs is covered by an injunction, but and so it's really important, obviously, that people do familiarise themselves with the terms and conditions of that injunction. But obviously, the more people are aware of it, then the greater the opportunity, perhaps, for an appropriate degree of creativity. So let's see what happens. But Misson Springs certainly needs boots on the ground, and of course there is a ready-made camp just down the road at Misson Springs, so plenty of space for people who want to go there, whether it's just for one day, for a couple of days, or for longer. Plenty of opportunity, and you'll get a great reception. And of course, as I've been reminded by the comments here, these deep boreholes which don't get fracked, the investors are going to be looking for some kind of return. And of course, it has not been categorically denied by anybody that these boreholes will never be used for the disposal of toxic nuclear waste. The deep borehole disposal program, which is being pioneered at Sheffield University in England. So it's really important that communities monitor what's occurring on these well sites, even after they have been abandoned by the potential mother fracker. So elsewhere, of course, in Newcastle on Monday, Mark Steele is being hauled back to court by Gateshead Council for having the audacity to continue to ask Gateshead Council the hard questions regarding its 5G and LED street lighting agenda. And Gateshead Council are doing everything they possibly can to ensure that the judge, Recorder Nolan, who made his ruling in the initial application, is not sitting for this hearing. And of course, this is because they perceive that Justice Nolan erred against them by not awarding the injunction that they were seeking against Mark Steele. Justice Nolan made it clear that he was not going to enforce any kind of injunction that could be perceived as a gagging order. And in fact, he went on to state that this was indeed democracy in action. And despite him observing that it was beholden upon Gateshead Council to acknowledge and address the concerns of their residents, Gateshead Council have continued to refuse to do so. And now they are seeking a committal hearing to effectively get Mark Steele incarcerated for standing up for his fellow residents of Gateshead and asking Gateshead Council questions which clearly they either cannot or don't want to answer, possibly a combination of the two. So please, if you're in the northeast of England, then join Mark and I will be there in support. Join us at the Moot Hall in Newcastle, and the hearing is scheduled to start at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. Now, this is scheduled just to be, I think, a 2-hour hearing. The judge has been, which is, I think, going to be Judge Kramer. And, obviously, one of the requests that Mark is likely to make is that Justice Nolan be appointed to the committal hearing, seeing as that he heard the evidence in the first hearing and made his ruling accordingly. Gateshead Council will, of course, be trying to make sure that Justice Nolan doesn't get assigned to that hearing. So this is going to be basically simply a hearing to determine whether or not Gateshead Council have sufficient grounds to take Mark to a full committal hearing where they will claim that he has breached the injunction. Now, my sense is that what they will try to do is they will try to get the committal hearing agreed to, and then they will push the date as far back as they can, and they will ask for a temporary injunction preventing Mark Steele from making any contact with councillors or officers or council employees for the duration. And of course, this is their attempt at shutting down the democratic process and also trying to prevent the wider awareness of the 5G and LED street lighting agenda. Though, as I observed on Wednesday, it is interesting now to see that a number of articles are starting to appear in the mainstream media. So watch this space, but I will be doing the Monday morning live stream from somewhere in the proximity of the Moot Hall in Newcastle, and I'll put the address up beneath this video. And finally today I'm going to make, because I'm running out of time here, I make a mention of David Noakes, and you know, please keep David in your thoughts. He's not having the greatest time in Wandsworth Prison. You know, he's in his phone calls, he's trying to remain upbeat, but his health is not great. And although he's been promised that he will get medical attention, it doesn't seem to be top of the list of priorities. So David is extremely grateful to all those people who have written to him over the almost 2 months now that he's been incarcerated in Wandsworth Prison. He's got a little over 2 months to go before he has the opportunity, hopefully, to be released on a tag, which of course will still be extremely restrictive. So if you haven't yet written to David and you have a little bit of time over this weekend, then maybe you consider dropping him a few lines, and I'll put the address again under this video later this morning. And meanwhile, of course, you know, we encourage people to do as much research as they can, because, you know, we need to bring the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, which is a pseudo government department, but it's effectively a protection racket for Big Pharma. And of course, Maurice Saatchi a few years ago tried to find a way through the blocks of the MHRA for innovative cancer treatments, primarily because his wife was suffering and I believe ultimately died from cancer. And of course, she was not granted access to some of the more innovative treatments, such as GcMAF. Now, although Maurice Saatchi attempted to bring a bill into play to find a way to allow innovative medications to be trialed without fear of prosecution or persecution by the MHRA. And in fact, Chris Heaton-Harris, who's the Tory MP for Daventry, but almost 3 years ago now, he was very successful in passing the Medical Treatments Innovation Act, which came into law on the 23rd of March 2016. But of course, you know, hardly anyone's ever heard of this act. And of course, Big Pharma, and in particular the MHRA, are doing everything they possibly can to keep awareness of this act, even though it's only a couple of pages, but keep it suppressed, because it has the potential to undermine the monopoly of Big Pharma, particularly on things like cancer treatments, which is a massive revenue stream for them. So, as I've said many, many times before over the last few years, this is all about encouraging people to do their own research, come to their own realization of what's occurring, and then deciding how best they can use their skills, their expertise, and whatever resources they're able to bring to bear to working to bring in about the changes that we all know we need to see. And you know, for those people who write saying, well, what can we do? What can we do? Please never, ever underestimate the power of sowing a seed. Although, you know, we tend to, in the time of this time of instant gratification, want to see that seed germinate immediately. You know, it's patience here. It's sow the seed. Allow that seed to get the nutrients that it needs to be able to germinate. And when that individual who has had that seed sown within them comes to their own realization of what's occurring here, then it will take a life of its own, and who knows where it may lead. And you know, it is truly wonderful to now see so many people from all around the world starting to take a look at what's occurring, you know, within, not just within their countries, but within their communities. And this is what is so important, because community activism, where people regain their own personal sovereignty and acknowledge and accept that their apathy is really the problem. Once they step up to the plate, once they participate in one way, shape or form in helping to bring about the changes, then that's when we have the global corporatists seriously on the run. So, you know, let's watch, observe and learn from what's going on in France right now. It's spreading to Belgium, to the Netherlands, to Sweden. And of course, you know, we have Brexit, and you know, we have to make sure that that is pushed through, and that the lack of democracy within the EU, I have yet to have a discussion with somebody who thinks it's a good idea to remain in the EU, who actually understands how the legislative process in the EU actually works. And that is very telling. And once again, all we can encourage is people to do their own research. So thanks for joining me this week. Thank you so much for watching and sharing. And I will be back with you from Newcastle, from the Moot Hall, where I shall be supporting Mark Steele as he resists Gateshead Council's attempt to incarcerate him for asking the hard questions about 5G and LED street lighting. You have a great weekend, and I will see you on Monday morning. You take care now.